Hey guys, I don't know if this is going to go anywhere. I've been up for a long time, but I thought I would come do this before I went and took a nap. Because I've been having these thoughts about archetypes. This is one of the iterations of the Jones polynomial. I'm going to leave it up here because I like how it's written down. We'll get into it later. Right now, I was just thinking about archetypes earlier, and really, archetypes are basically the preserved structures that allow for algorithmic operational instructions in survivally contextual situations that have specific relevances to the individual groups and locations that they're at, but the topological similarities that are prevalent across different civilizations and different groups of people, regardless of their geography, which involve certain types of drive combinations, which create the particular projection of the idea of what the experience would be and what that individual is manifesting. It's a physiological neural correlate structure which actually activates the genetic potential of that particular state. So you could almost think of it beyond beyond what I really want to say, which is something like fractal recursion of logical wheel-bound maximization. And I don't think recursion is right. It's more like fractal. So you got mating. So like fitting things together, right? What does it produce? But it's more than that. By the way, doesn't that look like a boat, the front of a boat? It's kind of how you can think of geodesics, right? Just like up here with the Jones polynomial, you have different locations in the geodesics which create a topological structure, and that's like one iteration of that set of geodesics, and this topological structure would be like along the pyramid one particular path, but it might be sort of a swervy path, but then you get the general average, which is like the Kloosterman summation. If we have different levels of drives, if we go back to Maslow, we have basic, then physical, sex, relation, esteem, and self-actualization. As you go through the different stages, pioneers, builders, commerce, affluence, intellectualism, decadence and decline, and then reset. For Glub, this was 250 years. Turchin and Dalio, they're both in the 200 to 300 year camp for the really strong ones. Even ones like you could no. So these are roughly 20 years that usually last. The generations are roughly 20 years. So in 250 years, you have 13 to 14. Well, 12 to 14 generations. During those 12 to 14 generations, as Thomas Sowell notes in his books, the same groups don't stay at the top the entire time, even generationally, particularly in this area. There's usually a lot of socioeconomic mobility in these regions where everything is relatively stable. There's some extreme socioeconomic mobility in here, but I'm not as familiar with that. It's around in here when things start to get ossified, but there's still so much surplus in this zone that the difference in the actual production and purchasing cost is not extreme enough in this area for anybody to really even begin to notice anything. And that's really where so this was like, for us, you could say this area after affluence. So you could make the case that World War II in the standardization of the US dollar was really our peak, but it really wasn't. It was actually before then. It was closer to World War I, after the Trust Busters, and then after Morgan and all that conspiracy theory around the meeting on that island. But once the institution of the Federal Reserve and some of the other financial structures became dominant power in the United States, everything became organized in a way which allowed for the monopolistic control of the propaganda. Like Edward Bernays was coming out not long after that, before World War I, and that was kind of the birth of the science of propaganda, even though obviously propaganda has been being used since the beginning of time. Anytime you have somebody puffing up their chest a little bit extra to win a fight, which is evolutionarily, as far as lobsters go, that's the type of propaganda. So let's make sure that when we're thinking about scientific concepts, we're not obsessing over the idea that it has to be somehow scientifically classified in order for it to be the same thing. So anyways, this zone right here. This was the whole MK Ultra repossession of the freedom movement, extra demonization of psychogenic or psychoactive compounds, sometimes for good reason and sometimes definitely not, as we've seen. But this is the area where Tucker Carlson was talking about, we grew up in a time where we could trust our government. No, it was just a fucking illusion. You can never trust your government 100%, even though I absolutely love and totally support the current administration. It would be extremely irresponsible to just be like, yeah, whatever they do, I completely support it. Okay? You want to still have the ability to think rationally about what's happening, even when you are maximally supportive. How else can you make contributions? Sometimes making contributions involves disagreeing with the people you care about. So what I was going to get at was that the different stages, like Sowell talks about how the same people go through different social classes, and the way that we do our statistics doesn't give accurate coverage to the actual structure of those classes, and the cohorts are not just staying stagnant all the time. It actually has to do more with the age of the individuals, but in that particular generation's circumstances, not just, you can't take a blanket, 60-year cycle measurement and just standardize it across everything. You have to actually pay attention to how the cohorts are moving through those different socioeconomic classes, and what the relative purchasing power and all that stuff. What is the educational environment, blah, blah, blah. And that's kind of what I'm getting at here, is that if you have group A and group B, and you have this sort of experience for them, okay, and you have other group. So here comes the immigrant family, right? They come in, they got a little bit of money, they have some industrious workers, doctor, another doctor, more successful individual, merchant, profligate son, spends a lot of money, children just barely maintain, maybe they buy some real estate. Here, maybe merchant flees his debt, shows up with some money, continues the same habits here. Family goes into decline, multiple generations of alcoholism and drug use. The family starts here again from the bottom. This descendant is extremely born into poverty, has to go a lot of hardship. The hardship forges something extra inside that person, and whatever was lost in this generation, because maybe it came from somewhere up a little bit higher from where this person was born from, and maybe they were born into a person or born into a situation about that scale. And then here, this was the descendant who fled because it had been profligate with the structure of the money that was here. So here you have an example of a sine wave that goes across civilizations, and where the end destination is the same as the beginning, but it went through, 8 generations or something. The archetypes that motivated this group are the same archetypes that motivated this group before they were successful here. So that's what I'm talking about. As you go through the cycles, and the archetypes that motivated this group, see how these are all similar in the directional progress, the eigenvalues of change for these particular. So these groups have more in common with each other than the same. They have more in common than this person has with this person, even though they're in the same lineage. Well, that was fun. I think I'm going to go take a nap, guys.